and Sonia joining us by Zoom. So we have one item agenda, and the agenda involves the folks that are our guests. So it might be a good idea to start just by going around the room and introducing ourselves. Shot over there.
Sir, my name is Jeff Aceto. I'm the senior civil engineer for SMRT Architects and the civil site engineer for the project management permitting and the design.
I remember you from another lifetime.
I was about to approach you. Very nice to see you, Tom.
Nice to see you, Jeff.
My name is Emily Sprecher. I'm new to the civil SMRT team.
Alex Cummings, I'm the design architect on the project for SMRT.
Chris Webster, the president of the ERP division located out of Yarmouth, Maine.
Tom Perkins with Dirigo AE. I'm Tyler's project manager.
Kyle Drexler, I'm the town planner here in Norton.
Megan Gardner, I'm counselor.
I'm Barry, I'm council chair. Jeffrey Gardner, council.
Cheryl Robertson, counselor.
Sophie Wilson, town manager.
So I'm not sure who leads us off in this.
And so.
Oh, it's Sonia. Hi, Sonia.
Tom, if I may interrupt just briefly, I would remind everybody that this is being recorded via Zoom and that the owl in the center of the tables is the microphone. So please make sure you speak clearly and you address all your marks towards the owl rather than towards the people in the room. I realize it feels awkward, but Sonia will have a hard time hearing you guys otherwise.
Thank you for the reminder. Kyle, do you lead us off here? Does Sophie lead us off?
I am so happy to pass it to Kyle. He's been doing all the work, right?
Sure. Yeah, so I think what we're here for is, we came to council previously to get sort of a general overview of the project and, start talking about using a contract zone as a mechanism to allow Tyler to have the office building at the location and talk about how the comp plan and, the town zoning map supports a contract zone change in this location. So what we're coming forward with now is a draft contract zone agreement that was drawn up that hopefully the goal is to allow Tyler to do what they want to do with the property, but also put in some conditions that would not normally apply in the zone that the contract agreement sets, to sort of blend in the project with the surrounding area and the existing uses in the more residential areas in that part of town. I think the end goal of the meeting today is not for any formal approval of the contracts, but the next step would ideally be to have the contract zone agreement go to the planning board for a public hearing, along with the applicant's site plan application, so that those could be reviewed by the planning board simultaneously. And then the contract would then come back to council for public hearing and approval after the planning board process. So I think we're looking to get any feedback from the council, have a few conversations between the applicant and council members on a couple items that there should probably be some conversation on, and go from there. So I can just sort of give a brief overview of the contract itself. A lot of the bulk of the language in the agreement is similar or really the same as what we use in other contract zone agreements throughout the town. So the majority of that hasn't changed, from the existing contract zone agreement for this property to some of the other ones that have been done over the years. The real area that we focus on here is one, it changes the base zone of the property from medium density residential to village commercial. And that's to allow the office use primarily, and also to give some more flexibility in relation to off-street parking that I think we talked about the last time we met. That was a goal. So if you look at the paragraph 1, that's on page 1 to 3 really. That's really the bulk of probably the conversation points. I mean, that's where the additional conditions and standards put in place in the contract would go. Again, starts out with, permitting uses. The goal here would be to allow a commercial office use. It goes on to the dimensional requirements. What it does is, and I think we'll see later when the applicant presents, is it aims to take the dimensional requirements of the MDR district. So you're looking more at that minimum lot size, the setbacks that are more prevalent in the MDR, but allow that office use that's allowed in the village commercial. The maximum building height is more aligned with what is allowed in the village commercial rather than the MDR. So we're looking at allowing the building itself to really utilize more of the village commercial standards, while the lot as a whole utilizes more of the MDR standards. And that, when you look at things like the structure not covering more than 1/3 of the lot, that's an MDR standard versus a village commercial standard. So while the contract sets the village commercial as the base zone, we're able to put in conditions that make that a little stricter, that pull back on what's allowed in the village commercial.
Can I interrupt for just a minute?
Yeah.
Part of the contract goes by putting the village commercial as the underlying zone. The only places that would be, the only way to restrict is with those conditions. So for example, if there was something that wasn't spoken to in the conditions, then the default is that it would be, it would fall under the zoning of the village commercial zone. That, okay, I just want to, even though Kyle's walking you through what his thought process is, legally, they would have all the rights unless you restrict them. In that contract.
So kind of moving through to the next section, it goes into off-street parking requirements. And this, I think, was a big focal point. Normally, we allow, or we require off-street parking spaces at 1 space for every 250 square feet of office space. So, I mean, for a project like this in the 25,000 square foot range or to 30,000, you'd be looking at 100+ parking spaces. I don't think that's what the applicant wanted. I don't think that's what the town wants in this location necessarily, to encourage more vehicular use. So, the goal of that section was to, it sets a base minimum of 60 vehicular spaces provided by the applicant. That number was arrived at after conversation with the applicant. Just if some future use comes in, future property owner, there's something there where you can't just take away all off-street parking and some problem arises as it's set a little further away from our main downtown area. But really, you're setting a minimum of 60 spaces, and from there, the applicant would be able to build what they wanted, whether it was 70, 80, 90, whatever level they needed to satisfy the employees or people frequenting the site. The following standards aim at formalizing the addition of some bike parking. Ideally, I think that some of the people using the facility would be coming from the downtown or the university or surrounding residential areas, providing a formalized space for them to be able to use that transportation method, hopefully encourage more of that. Offering a spot, we have committee meetings for the Black Bear Orono Express Shuttle, which kind of passes through right by the property. Simply offering an invitation to the applicant to take part in those meetings so that they can be involved. So when we talk about updating stops or routes and things like that, that they can be part of those conversations. So they could become part of that route and more accessible via that route. Moving on to the performance standards. One of the big things I think we've been working through is the village commercial as well as our commercial 2 district has certain design standards for commercial buildings. This includes limiting the maximum building footprint in those districts to 15,000 square feet, which was, I think, roughly in line with what the applicant was looking to do anyway. It requires a pitched roof on all commercial buildings. It requires facade materials that are residential in nature to an extent. So those design standards would apply to this project under this contract by rezoning into village commercial. Signage for the site, I don't think this isn't something that we've talked about too much. I'm not sure what exactly the applicant is looking for with signage, but basically the dimensional requirements allowed here would be what's allowed in the village commercial. It goes on to talk about that the sign should be externally lit, whereas the village commercial generally allows internally lit signs. I think that's something that there could be conversation around on either side if there was a desired different standard there. Lighting, really just creating a standard not to have an impact on abutting residential properties. And the buffer strips provided in D4 there are similar to what the planning board would require anyway for projects like this. The final section is more of a placeholder there for conversation around access and easements. I think the easier one to address is there's an existing sewer easement that runs along the river. Applicant has noted that there's also some town stormwater infrastructure on the property. An easement could probably be created there. That doesn't necessarily have to be built into the contract. That could be a separate document altogether in conversation done alongside this. So I don't really think that's not something we have to work on focusing and creating specific language for in the contract. And the other topic of conversation that I think would be important for the applicant to offer more input on and council to offer more input on is this idea of access by the public on the property. Just looking at it a little bit, and what I tried to note in the draft, this has gone to the council before for a contract zone agreement when the gazebo was put in place. At that time, there wasn't an easement or formalized agreement created for public access in the area. I think it's been a practice with the past property owner that access by the public was just generally accepted, but there was no formal arrangement there. So that's something that I would prefer kind of more conversation going on between both parties than trying to come up with a standard myself.
So I'm gonna probably be a little bit more forward than Kyle. I know that council has expressed a desire to ensure public access to the river. I also know that we have public access in Webster Park, and we also have public access deeded across the way at Browns Beach. I can completely understand why Tyler might not want to give an easement, because an easement is a forever document that they are giving away ownership rights of their property. And those ownership rights, if they're given to the town, now open up use in ways that the town could not stop people from using the property. And if the council was adamant that there needed to be more formalized public access there, I would suggest that you could get back to staff to look at more creative ways that are not as asking. I think it's a big ask from Tyler. And I would just ask council, when they're thinking about whether or not this is even a small ask that you want to make of Tyler, to kind of think about the purpose of that property and the other options available, in the public, for the public.
Can I ask a quick question too? When
Sure.
there is no formal arrangement for an easement, where does the liability, who's liable if something happens?
So they don't charge, and as long as they're not negligent, meaning they don't allow big, huge holes to exist or create attractive nuisances that are dangerous, the state of Maine has immunity, a landowner immunity law. So if they put something out that said a quarter every time you pass, they're now charging for it, and they would now be responsible for maintaining things. But I'm just, my personal opinion doesn't matter, so.
Well, no, I was curious about even before, if something happens, a boating accident or if something happened there, who is liable?
So.
If you have no formal easement or no.
But I think one of the issues is, even if it's an informal arrangement that is somehow formalized through licensure or anything else like that, the argument can be made that they are welcoming people onto their property. And it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be found to have immunity under the other statutes, but it certainly makes it harder to get it kicked out if the claim comes. That's why I know it can be frustrating at times when we have all sorts of informal relationships or people just allow things to happen, but when things work, it works. When things don't work, it doesn't.
So I am the owner of an informal relationship. My property is on Bennett Road and it is adjacent to the Stillwater River, as is yours. And I own right to the river. But the most traveled path in Orono goes across my property. And I'm probably not interested in an easement to the town of Orono or the land trust or anybody else. But some sort of a, informal agreement to allow that to continue is fine. And we have for the 30 years we've lived there. Now we have some sort of an agreement with the University Credit Union on the plaza that we participated with them on,
So
but it's not an easement.
it's not an easement. It is a license of sorts. And it defines a collaborative arrangement where the town paid for half of that plaza to be constructed. And we have the right to work with them and the expectation that we can put on community events there. They have said and would allow passive use of that property. That property is appurtenant to their structure, which is a different legal standard than a river trail would be. However, it is, UCU retains all of the rights there and all the responsibilities there. But it's more of a nod to the fact that that was a very clear collaborative public-private partnership. But yes, it's a license.
I would just say that I would assume that people are focused on this aspect now because the informal arrangement with the previous owner probably felt different to people because she's a member of the community. And if suddenly she said, well, I don't want you to access my waterfront anymore, then the community would say, over coffee at Ampersand would say, you're being a jerk. Let us back on the property because it's a small town, And I think the specter of like a corporate entity probably makes people nervous. I personally have never felt like there was a need to have an easement for access to that parcel of privately owned property. Regardless, we do have many spots on the river where there is public access. An informal arrangement would be nice. I'm also cognizant of time and that what I'm most interested in is like, what is this going to look like? What's its footprint going to be? How is traffic going to be impacted?
So could we agree that any of the easements or arrangements that we've talked about are not really necessary in the contract zone? Could we agree that those are separate things that we could work on? Yeah, I think they want us to maintain our stormwater infrastructure. I'm gonna guess that's probably not gonna be, yeah, I'm gonna guess that's not gonna be hard to get. So if that works, I think that gives Kyle the direction that you need with that section. And yeah, it's pretty amazing, some of the stuff they're thinking about. Be nice to see it.
Yeah, I'm good. with that.
Before we move on, can I ask how many parking spaces exist now? Just so it's,
I've counted off of the satellite imagery. I think it's somewhere around 80.
Okay.
Does anyone have a better idea?
65.
Oh, okay.
I got some.
Okay.
We're just out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'd be looking respectively for parking that is roughly equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was a little confused about that section on parking, Kyle. You kept talking about minimum.
So I should have included, I did reread that and I would probably want to include something that says a minimum of 60 off-street spaces. It's meant to, so normally we require a minimum number of off-street parking spaces for any commercial use. That's everywhere in town except in the village commercial. So the applicant, but normally a building of this scale would require upwards of 100 parking spaces. That was really more than what's needed here. So we wanted to pull back from that requirement of 100 spaces or whatever it would be, and really set some minimum so that there would be some available parking on site, but at a base level that the applicant could, if they have 70 employees and want to create 70, 75 parking spaces, they'd be able to. But you wouldn't be able to have a property owner there. If we just said abide by the village commercial standards and it's businesses don't have to provide any off-street parking, and you have a 25, 30,000 square foot office, and then the new property owner just takes out all off-street parking, and there's no mechanism for providing access.
So I take it the applicant is satisfied with 60 parking spaces?
Probably gonna be between 60 and 70. We haven't really got to that exact number yet. I think just kind of planning ahead, what we'll probably do is figure out, it's gonna be in that range. And then, we're gonna identify areas and kind of call those out. Speak if we do additional parking, this is where that's gonna go. Everybody knows what it could be if we want.
Is there a maximum allowance?
No, so that's the thing. Its aim is to set a base minimum, but that would satisfy what the applicant's trying to do now. But if they got more employees in the future and needed some more spaces there, then they would be able to expand that parking area if they had to, and the site.
Is there a requirement that there be a building on site? I guess I always think with contract zones, like I get anxious thinking about like, well, this is forever. So what happens if Tyler suddenly decides to sell the property or something that's, so like, it can't just be torn down and turned into a giant parking lot. Or can it?
I think you could say that possibly about anywhere in town.
All right, good to know.
Perhaps for consideration, if there are 60 parking spaces on the parcel and someone tears down the building, there are still 60 parking spaces.
Right, or what I'm saying is like, say you wanted to sell to someone who wanted to make a satellite lot to make money off of the university having no parking, for example, and then, then there's like just a giant parking lot.
So I think we
We
don't have
We don't want.
we don't have a land use for commercial parking lots. So I imagine that would be our mechanism
Love that.
to not.
Okay,
allow
good,
it.
good. That makes me feel less.
Thanks for that clarification. Carl.
Yeah. And I would add something there to clarify. I mean, that was pretty much it for my side, walking through the contract. I don't start with that presentation.
That would be great.
Jeff, did you want the single image or did you want to start the presentation where that was?
This presentation would be great through.
Bill, would you be able to bring up the slides that Thanks.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Jeff Aceto. I'm a civil engineer, and I'm going to speak to the we're gonna put the words of that contract zone into graphics for you, into perspective. My role is to show you a site plan now that will be a contract zone plan, that'll be part of the application with all the geometry requirements and other things that Kyle just introduced, hardwired into that drawing. And we have a draft of that now. Next slide, please. And one more, please. This is the. I did not touch the screen. Did not touch it, it warned me, so Kyle, don't touch the screen. I noticed at a distance, we've added some color to help put some perspective into it. If you can see the red line, this is approximately a 4.4 acre parcel. This lower area is College Avenue. Stillwater is here. This is the abutting properties of University Place. The automotive service is here. Thank you. Yes, very helpful. And briefly, there's the existing motel building, approximately 12,700 square feet in footprint size, 2-story, I believe you all know that. The parking is on the upslope side. We've got the pool patio. This is the walk going down to the gazebo that was part of the contract zone. It's pretty done. Some other important lines on this plan. This green shaded area is a 20-foot easement over the sewer. It kind of snakes along with the orientation of the sewer. This cyan or light blue line is the shoreline zoning 25 feet from high water mark. This is the overlay from here down. That's it. Thank you. To the storm drain, just briefly, we've gone ahead and shaded this. Rob Yersa drew a line from here to there, to out falling on the river, and then also from this catch basin here down, apparently tees into that line and it falls there. That's the storm drain in question, the infrastructure that presently has no easement. So just drawn what could be a 20-foot easement there. That's just for consideration. That won't be part of the contract, and we'll take that back off the plan. On the show that visually. The dark blue lines are the setbacks as proposed. I'm going to go through that. And this table up in the upper left-hand corner, this is the land of the civil engineer. I'm sorry, thank you very much. But this is a comparison of the MDR district now and the village commercial district now as amended by the draft. And so the numbers and the geometry that are in the draft letter are contained on the table right there, and then furthermore shown in the plan. I'd like to show you that and actually go through one at a time really quickly. Presently, the minimum lot size in the MDR is 15,000 square feet, and for the document proposed a 15,000 square foot minimum lot size for on this contract zone. Minimum lot frontage is 80 in the MDR. We propose to be the 80 as well. We presently have a frontage that's closer to about 400 feet or so on the frontage right there. The minimum front setback is 20 feet. We propose a 20-foot front setback consistent with the MDR. The side setbacks are 10 feet. Propose a side setback of 10 feet. The rear setback is 20. And in this instance, we're proposing a 50-foot setback from the rear line. So again, here's this blue line dash. This is the front setback at 20 feet. This is the side setback at 10. Here's the side setback at 10. And then it transitions right here to a 50-foot setback to that property line. We've worked with Kyle and coordinated with them. This is a common, in my experience, setback between a commercial and a residential use in other municipalities. That's a common district. Also, you can see from the heavy green, this is the tree line of the mature trees that are there. At this point, there's no intention of taking that area out. That's not an area that needs to be developed to get Tyler's needs taken care of. So this is not a hard line, so to speak. We can see there's plenty of woods in here screening to there. And by putting a 50-foot setback in, we're reestablishing that again, for the most part. The major water body setback is 75 feet. That was given out. So what was a side setback of 20 becomes this 75-foot line, and that completes the setback developable envelope. This dashed dark blue line again. This would be the developable envelope by the contract zone. The maximum building size, there is none in the MDR zone. It'd be 15,000 square feet in the VC. Maximum building height is 35 feet in the MDR, and it'd be 45 feet, which is the standard in the VC zone. The maximum building height in the overlay, shoreline overlay, is 35 feet now, and that can't be altered by contract zone, so that would be the same here. Any portion of the building that was over the blue line would be a 35-foot height restriction. The remaining of the building would be a 45 maximum height restriction. These items are not necessarily part of the the VC or the MDR, they are part of the geometry that covered off in the contract zone. The first is building area in the built shoreline overlay. That will be a maximum of 3,000 square feet. I'd like to show you this right here, that little corner, that's about 250, 300 square feet of the existing buildings in the shoreline. The agreement was to have no more than 3,000 in the shoreline zone. We still have a building layout to do. We have a site plan application. I don't want to go too far into those weeds yet, but I'll just show you the top of the topography is right here. This is the retaining wall around the pool, and all these contour lines are close together. From here back, from that blue line is roughly the developable portion of the lot to begin with. But going down that slope is perhaps problematic. So again, that's not a hard bound line, but the client has agreed to is 3,000 square feet of building. Bike parking storage, there is none in the MDR, one space for 2,500 gross. So for a 30,000 square foot building, that would be 11 or 12 bike spaces. The parking requirements were discussed now at length, 60 spaces. And again, the control on that is that any applicant would have to go to site plan review and demonstrate they have adequate parking on their lot to begin with to support their activity. That would get through the planning board without that approval. The use is offices are not allowed in the MDR. They are allowed in VC. The building coverage is 33% in MDR. It will be 33% elsewhere. And lastly, design standards for streetscapes that is not applicable in the MDR district, but it will be applicable in the VC district. And on that table, it says per section 18-128 design standards for offices. I'm going to hand it off to Alex here in a moment to talk about the building images and what those standards could be. Is there any questions about this plan or the geometry? Please.
All set?
Very good. Thank you very much. Alex, please.
Afternoon again. Thank you again for having us. I'm Alex Sash. I'm the designer.
You're gonna need to speak up, I think, a little bit for that microphone.
We are here to talk about the exterior of the building. So to give you folks an overview, which most of you are probably familiar with, we're in the early phases of schematic design, which means we're mining Tyler Tech for information on what they need: number of offices, size of offices, number of conference rooms, size of conference rooms, bike storage, mechanical spaces, etc. We're getting close to where that is. So think of it as Lego building blocks, right? Once we start to put those building blocks together, what goes next to what, we'll get a better idea of kind of the mass of the building. And that's from there, we're going to start to develop the architecture. At this point, we're some weeks away from having any idea what the building looks like. We kind of have some tidbits in our mind floating around, like ideas that we like, materials that we like, but we're not there yet. So what we're going to show you tonight is just those tidbits that are floating around, and hopefully that kind of jives with what folks are expecting to see. So next slide, please. So exterior materials. None of this stuff will be new to you. You'll see it around town. It's all sort of common materials, commonly used. It's also compliant with the VC zoning ordinance. So, you know, glass, obvious windows, brick, clapboard siding, stone, and metal. We show metal as intent is to use it really as sort of an accent, trim, that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. Design elements. So don't blast around into what these buildings look like. This is just bits and pieces that we and Tyler like from these buildings. So the varied building depth and height sort of gives a little more visual interest to the building. The glass atrium, sort of welcoming, backlit at night, kind of a nice way to center the building. The stone base, that was something that was a sort of a comfortable feel for everybody to have a way to ground the building to the site. You'll probably see it commonly used, you know, throughout town, and you know, in Maine in general, it's granite, it's everywhere. People like it, looks good, feels solid. Next slide, please. Again, you know, we really want to celebrate the slope of the site. That we don't want to fight it. The building needs to complement it. We don't want this thing jarringly sitting on the site. We want to sort of agree with the slope of the site. Again, stone, grounding it to the site, glass, that's backlit, welcoming, airy. The folks inside that building really want to capitalize on the view to the river. We don't want to deprive them of that. So this is going to have, a good balance of glass and solid building materials. And then just some idea images of what, we think, perfect world that riverfront could be, occupied by the building tenants, occupied by folks from the community, used for community events, concerts, weddings, what have you. So next slide, please. So precedent images, we were trying to come up with something that'll sort of stir imagination and kind of give us something to work towards. And this is how we incorporate glass, pitched roofs, siding, stone base, brick. You can see that all of these things can work pretty well in a building without it sort of feeling like it doesn't belong. We think that this would be very complementary to the site, to the town. There is, you can also think that there's some precedent to seeing a building like this in town elsewhere. Next slide, please. Some more ideas, some are wood sided, some are brick. Again, they are residential materials in nature, but that is not a residential building, and none of these are. So I think that this successful use of these materials, again, we think it's doable, getting a little creative. Next slide, please. Again, so just a mixture of building materials and shapes and sizes and forms that you're comfortable with, seen before. This could, fit, we feel, just about on any site that has a little bit of slope, a little bit of interest, and we think would be a sort of a valuable addition to a town. I think that's what we have. Yeah, any questions? Does that give you sort of a little bit of idea of where we're kind of headed?
Yeah, can I ask a question about the exterior, about how maybe you guys are going to talk about traffic flow and potential egress and ingress and stuff like that.
Sure.
Do you expect to keep the entrance to the parking area roughly where the entrances are now, or will that move one way or the other?
I'll actually defer to Jeff on that. He's the civil
Yeah, thank you.
engineer.
We haven't quite prepared a site plan yet. We need a building to really put the master together. I believe though, we have a traffic consultant who will be involved in the project here, Tom Eric, the town knows this pretty well. And the first pass, the first entrance to the parking lot, it's a great entrance. It's wide, it's far enough from the intersection, and it also starts to get a little steeper past that, heading down towards the bridge. So there's kind of a small drive-in or swings. That entrance probably is not necessary. We think we can probably accommodate this parking lot from the one entrance. Again, we haven't got a layout yet, but that small appendage doesn't really do a whole lot, and I would need that. And yes, the parking would substantially be where it is now. It'd be on the inboard side. We don't want to park on the river side. We want to maximize the views of the building and everything. So when we have a building in that size and that shape, we'll be able to fit it in there, work some angles, and get a better answer of how many spaces that will be. But in general, I think the site level is substantially what the existing one does now for a number of reasons. Again, we have to develop the building.
So yesterday, the town staff met with Maine DOT about the intersection at College and Park. And we're gonna have to have a conversation with Tyler because we think that there might be some DOT money to reimagine some of that intersection perhaps. So that, I don't want you to get wedded to one particular thing because perhaps bringing DOT to the table might allow us to create a safer and better access.
I was gonna say
to the
that
site.
intersection is,
That's not a good intersection.
especially if
It's
you're
a
on
corridor.
football intersections.
Yeah.
So
Coming out of
do they have to do a traffic
Main,
impact study?
North Main.
I think site plan review is gonna probably require that they do some level of traffic analysis. Kyle will work with them based on the information.
Yeah,
And
the number of trips expected really fits whether, the level of track analysis needed to
Right.
be done. But yeah, there'd be some look at the trips generated to the site and the access in and around the site and the intersection and all of that would be reviewed under the planning board.
And I assume that reviewing trips might also, or at least I would imagine that it's also about distribution because the current, or like the former use people were coming and going whenever, usually probably as individuals, but then the nature of an office building is frequently that lots of people are coming and going at a similar time. So is that part of the, in terms of number of trips, is the distribution of them part of that conversation?
Yes, what Kyle spoke to is in our scope of work for our consultant. And in terms of, it is a change of use from a motel with a certain number of trips and certain distribution to offices with a different one. That'll be part of the analysis.
So in the whole, or Kyle, I'm not sure I'm going to ask this to, in the whole progression of this plan, when do we get to see the building that they are going to have, the actual plan, and how does that fit with approval of a contract zone? How does that all fit together?
So I was very curious.
So
about this.
I don't like to tell my bosses that they don't necessarily get a say, but the contract ultimately you will approve after the planning board holds its hearing on the contract zone. Most of the time, you would see the contract zone and site plan review happening at the same public hearing before the planning board. So that would all come back to you as a package at the very end. If there were particular things that you felt were critical, that you absolutely wanted to see, that's something that you should be communicating to the applicant now so that there are no surprises later on down the road. I will continue to share all public information with council just because it's a big project and a big decision for you as it becomes available. You have the presentation right now that they're showing. I just sent that to you. So yes, but that would be the process.
Okay.
I guess I'm also thinking about not just council's access of information, but the public's, because my experience is that a public hearing, the best kinds of public hearings are the ones in which we get valuable information based on knowledge and research that the public is able to do. And so if a public hearing happens with very little tangible information, then the feedback you might get at such a hearing could be wildly all over the map.
With the site plan review, they are gonna come with a building. They're gonna come with what the site is gonna look like. They're gonna come with traffic analysis. There are the 13 points that the planning board has to make affirmative findings on or build conditions for as part of the process. When we have altered our process under Kyle and Mitch's leadership, that when there is a project of any size and scope happening, along with the abutter notices that go out, those documents also get uploaded onto the website. So people will be able to go on and see what the applicant package looks like. So this isn't come to the meeting to learn. You'll be able to learn online. And they have copies, bigger scale copies here. So yeah, so I think the piece that's important is when you're looking at a contract zone, you're looking at a use that wasn't otherwise planned in that area and saying, you know, how can we make that happen in a way that works for the community? But the planning board still retains all of its scope of authority around site plan review and project implementation. Kyle continues to lead with that, and I continue to be incredibly impressed with his level of forward thinking to try to get everybody to the end on one page, which is the goal. I don't want anybody to be surprised. I don't want you to be surprised. I don't want Tyler to be surprised, and I don't want the community to be negatively surprised. I want them to be happily surprised.
So some of the images that they showed in the slides, they're aimed at meeting those design standards for the village commercial. So at this point, it would be really the council saying, we're setting the policy that this lot has to abide by these standards, and then giving the planning board the role of saying when they come forward with the actual building, does this meet those standards? So if the council is okay with those specific standards, then that would be the process. Yeah, additional, so we said additional things can be added to the contract. It's useful to know that before going to the planning board, if there's some big change, because if it goes through the planning board process and then afterwards you say, I really wanted that specific design feature, then we probably have to go back to the planning board and then to council again.
So one element in the village commercial performance standards that has garnered a lot of conversation internally has been the idea of a pitched roof. What is a pitched roof? And I think the New England style of pitched roof is kind of two. But that's not what our ordinance says. Our ordinance says a 4 to 12 pitch, or 12 to 4, however you're supposed to say it. So I just want to be really clear that when you're trying to match slope, when you're trying to get using those residential facade exteriors, a two-pitch roof might not be what ultimately gets decided. And I just don't want that to be a surprise to anybody here, because I don't think that's what the ordinance says.
I have a question about maybe just the timeline of all of this. Does demolition start before everything's done? Or does everything get done and then the hotel comes down? How does that work usually?
I know we've talked about it, but I don't know if someone from Tyler would rather.
Yeah,
talk about
I
it.
mean, so this thing all falls apart. We're gonna need to dispose of the property, and we don't want to lessen the value of the property by taking it down. So the lights are still on, the heat's are, still heated. So very likely we would not start any of that until we got to approvals. Just as a matter of being.
Just add to that, Tom said, the conversation with Kyle, Kyle's expressed that until the contract's on its place, no work on the lot should occur, and that would be no later than the schedule we have now, sometimes.
Sometimes not.
So there wouldn't be
Oh,
there wouldn't be a preliminary demo and something sitting there with the less than, you're going to see the motel until the contract's on.
Oh, okay.
So I think as a business choice, that makes absolute sense. Somebody can demo a lot anytime they want to demo it. That, I mean, that they can't build, they can't do anything to it. I'm just thankful we're past April 1st, so I'm a happy camper. But
our job is to not only balance the legal obligations, but the political ones as well.
Yes.
So, you know, it's probably in Tyler's best interest not to demo the building before anything has been decided, because the public might not react well to that.
And I think Tyler, number one, Tyler needs to know that this is in general the contract zone that is going to go forward, so that they can then figure out what their building's going to look like, what their site plan's going to look like. That's then going to get tied up in a nice little package and given to Kyle. Hopefully there'll be discussion along the way, so there aren't any surprises, because surprises are money. We know that, right? And Kyle will be able to take that, and the next council, the next planning board that can reasonably be put on. There's a month of time between acceptance of an application and the planning board as far as a deadline. The planning board is going to go through this process, and depending on how complicated it is, depending on how many people show up for a public hearing, because Phil Rock is absolutely adamant that if people show up for a public hearing, they will be heard. So if it takes a long time, we might have to go over 2 planning board meetings. Our goal is always to try to facilitate a project coming in, having a public hearing and getting approvals the same night. That's our goal. We also want to work with Tyler. So when you talk about timing, I think if you can give a very clear direction to Kyle tonight that you're fine with what's in the contract, then they can go back to work.
Yeah.
And perhaps they could meet a June or July planning board meeting, at which time that would be, planning board, unlike council, likes to meet every month in the summer, so they would go a little bit faster. As soon as the planning board has done its piece, even if council doesn't have a regular meeting scheduled, I would expect that we would immediately turn around with a council notice for a public hearing and an ability to get the contract in place so that we could issue the permits.
I'm assuming you're not keeping swimming.
No.
That's a little bit too much fun at work.
No sip and dip.
No jumping out of the window.
Are there any other questions from council members on the contract, the proposed contract zone? Sonia, anything? You?
Thank you for asking. I think my questions have been answered by other discussion.
Great.
So feedback I'm taking from that is you are content with us moving forward.
You want us to put a bow on it?
I want you to put a bow on it.
I think that is a very accurate
Okay,
assessment.
thank you.
Excited.
Yes,
Yes.
we're happy to have Tyler in our community and look forward to what's going to happen there.
We're excited as well.
My mom's probably gonna be angry at you though, because she really likes staying in that hotel whenever she had the opportunity.
My son is a computer engineer. So he's fine.
I think you mentioned that last time.
I tried to find him a job.
Whose email address? Did I get to my mother?
Are we all set then?
I think we are, no meetings next Monday. It's
Oh,
Patriots
I'm-
Day. So,
Disappointed.
well,
Mom's gonna show up
we
anyway.
next meet on the 25th
Yes,
or something. Yes.
25th, and we have a workshop at the beginning.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. And if I don't have anything that is urgent, then that will be our entire meeting. Does that sound good?
Good,
Thank you all very much.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.